Hello and welcome, everyone. And we're live again. I'm so grateful to be here and on another episode of Present Potential. We have a special guest today, but before I get into that, I just want to share a moment of gratitude for everyone who tuned in to the first episode a couple of weeks ago, where I kind of just spoke openly from the heart about what this podcast is about, where it's going to go, and also building it together as a community because we go far when we go together, right? So, I've launched it. I have a YouTube channel as well and 10 subscribers, which really made me so happy. And I was just telling the special guest that 100% of those subscribers are my family, which I'm still very grateful for. So thank you all again for tuning in. And I'm so excited to go into this conversation. And welcome, Mimi. Thank you for coming.
Oh, you're so welcome. I'm going to be subscriber number 11. You wait, I'm ready.
You're too kind. Thank you so much. And I'd really like to use the full time really to get to know you, to learn from you as well. So we have around like half an hour, which is what we're going to be broadcasting as well. And Mimi and I have been in touch for quite some time. And every time we speak, I always get that sense of genuine empathy and connection. So really happy to go into the discussion. So maybe we could start with just tell us who Mimi is.
Yeah. Oh, who Mimi is. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I feel that absolute connection back, and I'm totally positive that everybody that joins us today will feel it as well. Hassan, I think your vision is so authentically kind. So thank you for having me. As you mentioned earlier, my passion is empathy. That's what you can feel. That's what I do every day. My purpose work really is to get up every day and create more empathy in the world, overcome loneliness, fill in the gaps, and reconnect society, starting with the workplace, but increasingly into society and the education system in the world as well. So that's my work. I speak, I teach, I train, I content create. I do whatever I feel I can every day, anywhere in the world, to create more empathy for all of us.
Wow. Sounds like there's so much on your plate and the things that you're doing and helping people. And I'd like to maybe start from the beginning. Like, were you always interested in doing this work from the age of, I don't know, like really 5-year old, 6-year old growing up? Did you have that kind of connection from when you started?
Well, I mean, not really. The answer is sort of yes and no. I always wanted to be a teacher when I was a kid.
Mm.
Obviously, I had no idea at those young years what type of teaching or what that would lead me to today. But so I always wanted to teach. I always wanted to share. And I write a lot about the fact that I follow in my father's footsteps, who is still today my greatest hero. And he was a great storyteller. So in that way, yes, I always grew up and wanted, and I guess had a knack for telling stories. And I always wanted to teach. So no one's actually really asked me that before, Hassan, in all of these interviews, but I suspect that in the end, it all came together, right? The teaching and the storytelling. So
Yeah.
in that way, yes. But did I ever think that I would be a best-selling author or a podcaster or an empathy advocate? No, that sort of, I always say that my purpose became me rather than
Mm.
me ever sort of laying it out for myself. You know, there wasn't a path.
Wow, that's so inspiring, and as well, like becoming a top-selling author and everything that you're doing, and wanting to become a teacher when you were young. I love that because it's these moments that we actually go back to understand what it is in our passion that connects us to the people. And even not knowing what kind of teacher that you wanted, and looking up to your father as well, who was your role model. Um, what are some of the teachings maybe that you saw in your father that really drew the lines for you as who you wanted to become or what you wanted to achieve? I'd really love to hear that as well.
Mm. Oh, thank you for asking. He is 86 years old and probably
Wow.
not watching this live, but I will play it back to him. And he can't leave his room much anymore, so I'm sure he will really be grateful that you asked the question as well. But I think, you know, and it took time for me to see this. Like, again, I didn't come here to talk about my book, but only because of your question. When I wrote it, I had to explore the question you just asked me. And I think before that, I had never ever thought about this. Really, I just, I was inspired by my dad. It was not until that writing process that I really worked out why. And I mentioned he was a storyteller, and I think he always saw things that other people couldn't see.
Mm.
So when he would tell us stories about, a couple at dinner across a restaurant, or they could be fictional stories about, a monkey or any type of fairy that he would tell us stories about.
Yeah.
But he would see things in those stories that other people couldn't, which is, I guess, what makes a great storyteller. And I think I learned through that. I learned a lot of that. I also learned a lot of ambition from him. I mean, people always ask me, Mimi, does your energy like never end? And the reality, it doesn't. It never does. And I think that is because of that ambition. I never see the word no. I always try and find a new way to tell those stories, to reconnect people, to do this work. And he was very tenacious, my dad.
Mm.
He really fought against all the odds to get where he went. So, yeah, perhaps it was part storytelling, part insight into humans,
Yeah.
and part ambition.
Oh, wow. Sounds like an amazing man, and really inspired just to hear the stories that he would tell. And I can imagine it as well, because sometimes we go visit my daughter's grandfather. So
Mm.
my wife's, actually their great grandfather, because it's my wife's grandfather, and he just
Wow.
shares stories, and they love just listening to it. And he comes up with creative stories as well. And it's these
Amazing.
moments, I guess, that really inspire us as youngsters to grow up and do amazing things like what you've done so far. And just talking as well about like the process of sharing stories and writing that book. What really inspired you to spend that time and energy to focus on what you wanted to share with the world?
Oh my gosh, it was like obligatory. Like it, I honestly, I feel like the book wrote me. Again, I never planned on becoming an author. It wasn't something I had grown up wanting to do. And even today, all these years later, when I say the word author, I always have that like imposter moment. I'm like,
Mm.
am I an author? Like, did I really write a book? And in fact, I just finished my second last week, and I still think that. Like, I reread the edits, and I'm like, did I write this? So I think that writing became me. That story, that first story, when I started writing, I was writing about my experience. I had moved to Dubai. I had taken over a business. I had really struggled to take on that role. It had been a really big career shift
Mm.
for me. And I started to write almost as, I guess, therapy to myself, like a way to structure my thoughts, to work out what on earth is going on in what was a very crazy time. And it wasn't until I had about 35,000 words, Hassan, that one of my friends said to me, well, why don't you publish a book? And I remember being like looking around, like, who? And she was like, no, you. Me. No, I can't write a book. And I thought the only people that wrote books were like John Grisham or somebody at UCLA. But she said to me, no. She said, write it. And I guess the rest is history. I found a publisher in the UAE who kindly took me on and believed in the story and the need to create the dialogue around empathy and why it was important to the world. And that was 2018, 2019. And honestly, Hassan, no one was talking about empathy back then. So that publisher was a gift, really, that she saw that in me. Today, that's changed. Everybody's talking about empathy, but certainly that's been a journey in the
Oh,
making since those early days.
that's such an inspiring story. And then you mentioned you've reached 35,000 words, and your friend was saying you should write a book. It sounds like sometimes when we're doing something and we don't really see it because we're so close and focused in the moment, that we don't really take a step back and look at it like what we're doing from a different perspective. I
Mm.
guess like you're very close with that friend and still in touch. Just assuming
Yeah,
because of
yeah, I still am. But you're right. You sometimes have to slow down. I still try and do that now. When something good happens or there's a moment, you rush to, you share it on social media, you tell the people that need to know, you put it in your brochure or wherever it's supposed to go.
yeah.
But so often we don't stop and slow down enough to really take stock with that. So
Yeah.
I'm trying to do better at that and
Mhm.
really celebrate the small moments, because you never know when the big ones are coming. So I feel like
Absolutely.
it's really important to celebrate the small ones.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing. And I can see comments as well from Kavuma. And please forgive me if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly. Saying so amazing, let me follow up. And Saeed as well, saying grateful for the friend who gave you that nudge. And I completely agree with him, because without that nudge, a lot of people wouldn't have connected in such a way and gotten to know what empathy is, and also from your point of view, which is really inspiring. So
Mm.
when you were writing about empathy and also wanting to connect more with the people, um, who were you writing it for? You said you started writing it for yourself, but how did that change with the process, like from 35,000 words onwards?
Mm. Do you know what, the honest truth, Hassan? I think I wrote that whole book for me.
Yeah.
um, I obviously had to edit it for other people. And I
Mhm.
always remember that the editing process was really hard for me,
Yeah.
because first of all, it was COVID. So I was editing, locked in a house as a single mum with a baby at the time. So the editing process was really tough. But I think you actually hit on a really good insight there, which was that editing process meant that I had to reread something I had written
Mm.
through a different lens, right? Empathy for the
Yeah.
audience, and making sure that that was structured like that. And I had to do it in reverse. When I wrote the second book, which, as I said, I just finished, I
Mm.
did it for them from the beginning. I
Oh,
think it was, maybe the first book was for myself, but the second book, and hopefully all my future books, are written as an act of service, I guess, for everybody else. What I've learned and how I want to spread that, and how I want to help people
mm.
understand, particularly, empathy, but particularly self-empathy, and what that means, and how you can use it, and why you
Yeah.
should.
Yeah.
So I think my mindset shifted, and I became an author, I guess, through that process. So the second time that I wrote a book, I wrote it for you, right, for the audience, and I didn't have to edit the second one, not really. So yeah, it was a journey, right? It was a journey from that sort of moment of need that grew this career as an author,
Yeah.
to now just having a passion and a purpose. I mean, I just finished the second one, and I already want to write the third.
Amazing. Wow. And I love that you said that it's going to help you to write future books. So it's actually the process, like what you mentioned. It's not just writing one book and then that's it, I'm done with it. You're actually embracing the path and the journey that you're taking to share that message. And I'm
Right.
just wondering, like, because we've touched on empathy, and I'm sure many people might know what empathy is, but how would you describe empathy to, let's say, if a student, 6-year-old student or 7-year-old student, were to ask you, like, what is
Mm.
empathy? How would you describe it?
Mm. I mean, I guess I would say it in two ways, because I have a 7-year-old daughter, and when I teach it to children, how I explain it to them is that you're seeing the world through somebody else's glasses, or
Mm.
walking in someone else's shoes. That's how I make it really simple for children. And many people have heard that about walking in the shoes of another. When I'm teaching adults, and all the work I do in the professional world, we talk about perspective taking.
Yeah.
And I say to my audiences, that is really what we're talking about. Fundamentally, empathy is about perspective taking,
Yeah.
understanding why somebody else sees perhaps the same environment, the same context that you're in, differently. Why does that make them feel stressed? Why are they not performing? Why are they turning up late? Why are they angry around the
Mm.
boardroom table? So fundamentally, empathy is a skill set. It's a pro
Mm.
evolutionary skill set. We were born with this
Yeah.
to connect us as human beings, to be able to take the perspective of other people.
Oh, wow. I love that in terms of like perspective. And let's say if you were to go back to writing your first book and explaining what empathy is and how you wanted to really write to yourself and explain what it is, but also connect with others, what was like a turning moment or a position that you felt that this is such an important message that I
Mm.
want to write and share it because I'm gifted with that type of skill that I can share with others?
Mm. I can remember it really, really, really clearly, actually, Hassan. So the very short version of that story was when I began to write. I also met with a business coach. I
Mm.
was in Dubai, And she, in this meeting, she asked me about my leadership style. And at the time, I was talking about intuition and being a very intuitive leader.
Mhm.
And she stopped me and she asked me, Mimi, is it intuition or is it empathy? And that was the first time that anybody had ever asked me that. So I went away and I started to really explore what empathy is. And I discovered two things to answer your question that really I felt I have to do something with this. The first was I discovered the empathy deficit, which is a term that was originally actually coined by President Obama before he was president in 2006. And the empathy deficit refers to the lack of connectivity, the lack of connection, the gaps between us as humans.
Yeah.
So that was the first thing that I discovered. And I thought, how did I not know about this? How does nobody know about this? The empathy deficit is growing at 48%. So it's a huge gap between us, and that has been increasing over 30 years. And the second thing within the empathy deficit that I discovered was that the second biggest killer of our youth, of our children, so 14 to 24-year-olds, is
Yeah.
no longer vehicle accidents, it's suicide.
Mm.
And I felt, Hassan, that if our children are killing themselves rather than choosing to stay on the planet with us, because there is so little understanding, because the gaps are so big amongst other reasons, we
Yeah.
have to do something about it. So both of those pieces of data changed my life, really. And there are many more. From that point on, I discovered many more of these social realities that I really believe we need to solve for.
Wow. That's very powerful. I felt it. And also, I've never heard of empathy deficits, and you said that it's growing. So if I understood correctly, that deficit is becoming bigger. So it's a larger gap that is being there. And the second point about like people harming themselves to as well, which is really eye-opening. And I feel the passion in what you're doing is such a driven moment in sharing this type of message that is so deep. Um, I'm wondering what would be the so you've written your next book, which we could touch on, but what would be the book after it? Because you're continuing to write and having
Mm.
this type of passion and connection to people. Where would that journey lead?
Mm. Well, to answer where it will go, I'll just give you a little information of where it is in the middle. So the book
Mm,
I've just finished is fundamentally about longevity. So it's
mm,
about why empathy creates longevity for us as humans, as leaders in our relationships, but also on the planet, right? Time on the planet,
mm,
literally how higher levels of connectivity, belonging, relationships with others quite literally saves your life.
yeah,
The 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 biggest kind of challenge that we have out there to really overcome, in fact there are many, right, but the one that I specifically focus on is loneliness.
yeah.
52% of us are lonely, Hassan. And what we know about lonely people is that they die 8 years earlier, statistically, and that
Mm,
chronic loneliness is as dangerous to you now as smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
oh, wow.
So my second book is about the connection that we need to turn this around, to overcome
Mm,
loneliness, to overcome isolation. And when empathy goes down, when connectivity is low,
mm,
all of the isms, racism, sexism, ageism, ableism, all of them go up.
yeah.
So the further we are apart from each other, the further apart we become. So, if I carry on writing, which I think I will, because I'm pretty sure I'm hooked, this will be what I'm writing about. How do we find each other again? How, what does connection mean? What does belonging mean? What does friendship mean? How do
Yeah.
we do that better? And how do we balance our self-empathy? So the understanding of ourselves in our places and our spaces in the world. So yeah, I don't think I'll ever veer off that. That is my absolute passion work.
Wow. I love that. I keep saying I love everything, but it's so true because you've touched on like longevity, connectionness, and how it's so important for us as humans to be so connected. And it
Yeah.
reminds me as well, like in the workplace, because most of us go into the office or we go into any type of corporate environment and feel that it's kind of a challenge and that we want to do everything on our own, while when you're doing it on your own, and by the statistics that you shared as well, like loneliness is such a, I don't know, a detrimental way that can impact our health. Um, what are some things that you've noticed as well, like when you were doing your research and writing the second book, in terms of what helps in terms of connectiveness and longevity?
Mm. I mean, fundamentally, relationships are the core to that. You know, we are not meant to be alone. We don't do well when we're alone. We're pro-social species. And there are many ways that modern society have pulled us apart. And one of the things that I've really been looking at in the second book is, what are those reasons? Why is it that when we're lonely, we so often don't fix it? Because
Yeah.
for anyone, and I see there's lots of comments there, I can't read them because I'm concentrating on Hassan, but I'm sure he'll put them up for us in a minute. But if you are one of those people and you are suffering with that loneliness, I want you to really know this, that the only person that can fix it is you. You know, there are people everywhere that want to connect with you, that want to lean in. But so often, Hassan, we don't do it. We don't do it because of fear of failure, because of fear of embarrassment or shame, because we feel uncomfortable, because we don't have confidence, and because modern life has given us so many ways to dial away from that, right? So if you go home at night and you feel really lonely or alone or anxious or unhappy, any of these emotions,
Yeah.
it's actually the truth of the matter is, it is easier to put on Netflix and
Yeah.
forget about it for a while than it is to fix it. So
Mhm.
that's why I say to people, if you are feeling lonely, whether that's in the workplace or in the world, pulling back that confidence to say the only person that can fix this is me, is
Yeah.
you can. But self-empathy is a really big part of that, Hassan. Understanding yourself, what are you missing? Why are you missing that? And how do you dial into the fix for that? So
Yeah.
I think, yeah, it's a big topic. It's more than the time we have tonight, but I really hope that that this conversation is the beginning of many more. I can see so many people writing there for us
Yeah,
to say
absolutely.
that they resonate with it or they feel it, and that's the reality, Hassan. This is not a small issue. You know,
Mm,
people don't want to admit it. You know, of that 52% of lonely people, statistically,
yeah.
only 15 to 18 will admit to that loneliness. We don't
Oh,
want to admit that
wow.
we're suffering alone, and that's
Yeah,
even worse.
it is. And it's so true, because Saeed is saying we feel vulnerability is a weakness. And it's
Mm,
exactly what you're saying. Like, even with that percentage, not a lot of people are speaking up to say that they want to connect, they want to change, they want to take that step to become different. And
mm,
I'm wondering, like, what it is that people can do actually to inspire this kind of empathetic connection, and really be there to show the support that our community, and it's going to be definitely a bigger discussion, but like as a human race, how we support one another.
mm. Like I believe that the first step is awareness. So these conversations
Mm,
are so critical, and that's why I'm so grateful that you want to have it as well, Hassan. Awareness is the first step. We also just have to create spaces to normalize that emotion, right? That loneliness. The irony is, you are not alone in your aloneness.
yeah.
In many cities around the world, Belgium, Paris, Japan, up to 48% of the city lives alone with
Mm,
one sole person in the house. So, so many of us are going through this. The other thing that we spoke about earlier, we touched on it about celebration, which was to slow down.
yeah.
And I think, you know, the pace of life is so fast. We live in this constant state of always on stress and anxiety and running from one thing to the next, climbing the ladder, all of those things,
Yeah.
that somehow we deprioritize these skills that make us human, these connection skills, this belonging. You know, how, and I do it as well. How often, you know, right now I'm speaking to you and all of our guests that have joined us, but I'm not
Yeah.
calling my mum, for example, right?
Mm,
I'm prioritizing my life's work, my purpose work in this hour over, for example, my mum or my sister or anybody else, right, that I could be
mm,
with. So we are deprioritizing our relationships all the time. And what I
mm,
really hope that this work can help people understand is that it is killing us. And this is not just uncomfortable or
mm,
like bad news. It's making people sick and it's killing people. So we have to find ways to reset the conversation. That's why I say it starts with awareness, then it
yeah.
moves on to that normalization. And then we need community. We need community to do that, you know, to enable us to have that space. And there are many, wonderfully, there are more and more
Mm,
communities. And I think the important thing is to find the authentic ones where people aren't there to talk about, you know, material wealth or progress, but they actually want to find people that they want to listen to, that they want to connect with, and recreate those bonds.
I love that. Yeah. Awareness, such a big element to developing that empathy and also understanding ourselves. And I'm just going to pull some of the comments that we've had. So this is from Sarah, and she's saying support can be a simple conversation with someone to let them know you are there if they want to chat. And I love
Yeah.
that because it's so true. It's just being there, it's just a simple conversation. And it's also reminding me about like how different definitions of certain concepts can be really personalized and subjective. And I love that you say that empathy is a skill, meaning like in my own definition that it's something that we can build on and cultivate, that we're not really
Absolutely.
born with that kind of talents or different approach to how we speak with people. And
Mm.
I'll share also what Said said, because this is something that you said, which really hit the
Ah,
nail on the head, which is you are not alone in your aloneness. I mean, that's just so powerful. It's true. It's
okay.
and what Said is saying, it's like joining a support group. It takes some of the pressure off straight away, just having that
Thank you,
connectiveness.
Sunny. It's funny, you know, one of the most amazing things I find, Hassan, about these sessions and going live is that moments like that when Saeed says, you know, you said this thing, Mimi, and it really meant something to me. It reminds me, even as the speaker, of the power of your words.
Yeah.
Because when you're live and you spend so much time on screens and on stages, well, for me at least, I can only speak for me, but I speak from the heart, I speak from the moment. And Hassan will tell you guys, when he asked me before, do you want me to prepare you some questions? I was like, no, please don't. Please don't tell me in advance. Let's just talk. So when I see comments like that from Saeed, it's yeah, it's just a kind of recall moment for myself as well, that, you know, words are so powerful and they can shift mindsets. But I also agree with what I think it was Sarah, right, that was saying there, which is that sometimes it's just creating a space to say, you know, if I think you said there, Sarah, if you want to talk, and I would add to that and say sometimes talking about words, it's about, do you need someone to listen? I saw data recently that showed that 39% of people in the workplace do not believe, it's probably quite true, do not believe that their leadership teams listens to them. So 40% of people, more or less. And I think sometimes just offering to listen to people is
Yeah.
such a powerful thing, and we don't do it often, right? We totally underestimate the power of listening.
Absolutely. And it reminds me as well of what people think communication is. And it's not really about talking, because when you're talking, that's just only one way that you're communicating, but it could be the way that you're listening and reacting by your physical appearance, body language, facial expressions, tone as
Yeah.
well. Like all of these things really connect with people. And I love the statistic that you've shared with us.
People are amazing at sensing things. So, you know, even if you're not someone that believes in kind of energy in rooms and that type of thing, even if that's not your bag, the reality as human beings, our subconscious is so capable, it is so
Mhm.
strong. So if you sit in a meeting and you think, oh, this guy's really upset with me, that feeling, that is an evolutionary skill set, right? So you know, people know when you're not listening or when you're distracted. Your children, they know too, right? So I always say to people, Hassan, you know, one of the questions I get asked a lot is, how do I get my teenagers to share, right? How do I build my relationship with my teenagers? And I often ask people, well, you need to ask yourself, for the first 11 or 12 years of their life, how often were you listening to them
Yeah.
versus telling them? And you always see parents kind of go, oh. And then I say to them, well, then why should they start listening to you now? You know,
So
for
true.
12 years, you didn't listen. Not really. Did you really listen why they were upset about their friend in the playground, or that their teacher had said this thing? Or
Yeah.
were you always jumping to, well, you shouldn't worry about that, darling, and it and answering it for them?
Yeah.
Because if you weren't listening to them for 11 or 12 years, don't be surprised when they turn 13 that they no longer want to share.
Yeah.
They have been tuned that way. You taught them not to share. And now you want to reverse it, right? So
Mhm.
I think it's the same in the workplace. People can sense it and they learn from that.
It's so true. The way that you've connected it as well to teenagers, because I have two daughters. They're 3 and 5 years old. So teenage years are approaching very quickly because I can remember when they were born. But it's so true because sometimes when we would, if I ask them, why don't you eat your food? And they don't say anything. And I say, why don't you eat your food? And I keep repeating the same phrase over and over again. And then eventually I'm saying, they're not listening. But it's so true what you said because they're just responding and communicating in a certain way. And it's me who's not listening because I'm
Mm.
just saying the same thing over and over again, not learning what it is. There's a lot of comments that are coming in. There's questions as well.
Yeah,
We're
let's answer them.
we're reaching the end, but I want to cover them as well. So Daniel is asking, and I'll post it here as well. So he's saying, how about looking from the other side of the conversation? How do you make people listen when you talk? Such a great
How do
question.
you make people listen when you talk? Oh, yeah, it is a really good question. And hello, Daniel. How do you make people listen when you talk? I think there's a couple of parts of that, really. I think the first thing is, as we were just saying just now, if you haven't been listening to them, it's quite hard to make people listen to you, right? People don't want to. And this is a really long answer. So to make it short, fundamentally, when people feel heard, when you have given them the gift of listening, there is trust. You have moved up the behavioral stairway, right? The shift in behavior stairway. You have created rapport and trust. That listening will then come to you. So the first step, if you want people to listen to you more, and I'm not just making it up, it is to listen to them, right? Reciprocity. No, that's not how you pronounce it. But the reality is
I think we
that
got
it
it.
will
Yeah.
get better, right? It's clearly too late for language. But that response to each other is the best way to do it. The second thing, I think, Daniel, and I find this personally, so it's a personal answer, is that when you speak with intention and conviction and passion, people listen. If you have slides behind you in a presentation and you're reading off bullet points and you're reading it like you've done it all before, it's very hard to gather that energy from people. So I think the first advice I'd say is, do unto others as you want them to do with you. And it's totally true. The better listener you are, the more people will listen, the more they will share as well, by the way. And the second is to do so with intention and authenticity. I think when I have conversations with people and I feel that they are listening to me, I know that it's a whole body experience, right? I'm leaning into them. I'm doing it now with Daniel's question and with Hassan here. My eyes, my body, my smile, my energy. I don't know, Daniel, you can tell me in the comments, but I think it's quite hard not to listen to me right now. I really want to work hard. I want you to want to hear me. I want you to feel that I'm talking to you, Daniel, right now. So I think that you have to share energy. You have to share effort. Listening and speaking is not as natural as we think it is.
Yeah. I definitely feel it. So if you just replace Daniel with Hassan, definitely I can say 100% that I can feel that energy. Thanks for sharing. So that's such a great answer to cover. And Daniel is there, but we don't know. I don't see what the message is. So we'll get to that. But we have another question from, and please forgive me if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly, Yosef. Two questions, really. And the first one is, what are your views about negative aspects of empathy in terms of doing too much to the detriment of ourselves? And then the other one is, are there any cultural aspects leaders should be more in tune with when it comes to empathy?
Yes, so let me answer as succinctly as I can. And thank you so much for the question. The questions. The first one is a very common question. I get asked this a lot. The reality is there is no limit to empathy. So a different way to sort of frame the answer is people often ask me, can I get burnt out from empathy? Which is kind of what you're insinuating here, right? Without doing too much to us. Empathy is a skill set. Empathy is data. Empathy is your ability to understand other people. There is no end to the benefits of understanding other people. What you do with that understanding, that is a choice. It may be an action. It's a decision. The action on the back of that could potentially hurt you. So there is a thing called compassion burnout or compassion fatigue. So the empathy itself is extremely unlikely to do damage or detriment to you. It is understanding, it is data, it is information, it's hearing what people are saying and the meaning of that, so that you can make better decisions, so that you can be a better friend or a better dad or whatever it is you're talking about. What you do with that information, and that moves into an emotion, for example, i.e. compassion or sympathy, or an action, those things, those decisions are ones that you might want to balance and monitor. So if you absorb all of this information from people and you hold it and you hold it and you're feeling, like this tireder and tireder, that's compassion, that's sympathy, it's an emotion, and that can hurt you. So I don't personally believe that there are any negative aspects of empathy as a skill set itself.
Yeah.
The context, of course, could have a different impact. And the second one, which is around culture, yes, again, big question, big answer. Yes, in that, in order to empathize across cultures, you have to be very good at empathizing if you want to do it effectively, because you have to be able to lean in quite literally to the reality of other people's cultures. Empathy is judgmentless and agreementless, which means to understand, you don't have to agree or make any judgment on that. You don't have to like it. You just have to understand it. And that can be very hard, because there are, of course, many different cultures, how they eat, how they sleep, how they treat their women, their views on marriage, that a million things, right, which can pull people apart, which is why we need empathy. Because empathy is that leader in this kind of cultural aspect, the leader's ability to say, I don't understand that, but I want to. Help me understand why this is important to you. And you may never agree, but that's okay, because empathy is about understanding those cultural differences, not necessarily adopting them or judging them. So I hope those were good, quick answers to those.
Absolutely. Those were amazing. So the first one, and just to recap, because I think it's also important to highlight what you just said. So in terms of like having empathy, there's no limit. The more empathy that you have, the actual impact that you can have in others' lives. And we've touched on like the longevity and also the connectionness, but also it's what you do with that empathy that can turn into something else. That's so powerful. Just understanding that distinction is so enabling to approach people and having that conversations. And I also really want to highlight what you mentioned in terms of like the cultural aspects and how empathy is not being judgmental with others. So,
Mm,
and it depends like where people are from, because it's true. There's a lot of differences between us from different places and regions and experiences and the way that we were all brought up, and not having any judgment and just being there listening is such a powerful skill to have.
it's a
Um,
hard one as well. It's not, it may be, I often say to people, it's simple, but it's not easy, right? To really empathize with people that are unlike you takes time, takes patience, takes imagination. So these are simple things, but they're not, Hassan, they're not easy things. They're not as straightforward as you might think.
Yeah, so true. I'd love to continue talking and learning more. Like I've taken away so much from our conversation, and I'm so grateful for everyone who has joined and asked questions and engaged with us. And um, we have a tradition in Present Potential where we ask the guests to one question that would kind of embrace what they see going forward in terms of how they are. Maybe I didn't
Mm.
phrase it correctly, but the question is, what is your mantra? What is your self-talk? What do you continue to repeat to yourself that enables you to continue doing what you do so amazingly?
Oh gosh. The one that comes to mind
Yeah.
is probably this one, which is that we are all more alike than we are different. I use that for my work, for my audiences, for my daughter, for everybody. But I also use it for myself. So to answer your question, as I said, these things are not always easy. And founder life, entrepreneur life, this life that I'm living, which I absolutely love, can be very lonely, can be very difficult. You're trying to scale and travel the world and balance all these things, and fundamentally you're alone all the time, teaching empathy alone. And there's always going to be people that don't like what you do or don't agree or don't see why there's any point, people tell me, why do you do this? Right? This is too niche. This is not relevant. All of those types of pieces of feedback. And I think that mantra of, in the end, regardless of what people say or what they do or how they feel in the moment, as humans, we are all more alike than we are different. We all want to be loved. We all want to be needed. We all want to grow and thrive and smile. And I think that's a really powerful reminder for all of us in the workplace, but also in the world, that in the end, as humans, what brings us together is more than the things that put us apart.
Wow. Thank you so much, Mimi. Appreciate you sharing with us your mantra, and this is something that I'll take with me for sure. And it's been a pleasure having you and just getting to know you, and appreciate you spending your time and energy and also connecting with us. And a really big thank you to everyone who joined, the comments, the questions. If you have any other questions or you'd like to reach out, I'm just going to invite them to reach out to you, Mimi, if that's okay. And
Anyway, anytime.
and until next time, thank you again, and we'll speak soon.